Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder it is time to have a look at a little bit of a teaser that was put out on the War Thunder website. It was also put out on the Twitter, the Instagram, Facebook, everything like that. And it seems to hint at something happening on the 3rd of October. The whole announcement is, at least on the UK side of things, is danger. Crane operations overhead, passage prohibited, and it says a huge container ship from the Admiralty has docked at our port. The official handed over an envelope with a note saying, "Prepare your production equipment by October the 3rd. Now, what does this mean? Well, it can mean many different things, but the main thing that people are pointing to is some kind of event which is based around engineering certain vehicles, very similar to other events that we've seen in the past. But first of all, I do want to have a look at some other things which pertain to the 3rd of October, just because it seems more prevalent to talk about that before we get into the specific wording of this, just to see the history of what's happened on War Thunder, because it's a day which does have a lot of history in War Thunder. It is a day where stuff always happens, and it's mainly because of a specific nation. So going on to the Russian side of things, it pretty much says exactly the same thing, apart from the fact that it's unloading. Also, this picture is from the cargo ports map, if you didn't realize, the new map which was just added to ground forces. And there isn't really anything that we can see which pertains to anything out of this picture, or at least nothing we can really glean. So the next thing is, what is the 3rd of October? Well, it's German Unity Day. This was the day when the West and East Germany and the Berlin Wall fell and all of that wonderful stuff, and everybody came together to create what we know today as Germany. So the German Unity Day celebrates that, and in War Thunder's history, since it's been around, it has been celebrated on the 3rd of October. So the first one, at least that I'm going to talk about, is in 2015, when they gave away the HE-51 hydroplane. Now, if you didn't get your hands on this, it has been available in other events in the past as well, but it's a wonderful little machine which you can find at Rank 1 right here. It also holds some very interesting little bombs, 10-kilo bombs that you can see under the wings here, but as you can see, it's just a little smidgen of a hydroplane with some 792s. A very nice little collector's item, but not too useful in the game. On top of this, the next year, in 2016, it was just some bundles. So you can see you had the German Unity Day bundles. Then in 2017, you could get access to Flagel's Bf-109A and also the Panzer II DAG. So we're going back towards, being able to get vehicles. Then the next year, 2018, or last year, we were back to bundles once again. So the pattern, at least if we have a look at these, is you've got vehicle, then next year is bundles, then the year after is vehicles, next year is bundles, and then the year after should be vehicles, or some form of vehicle. So to me, if we look at that pattern, and if we look at what we've seen in the past, looking at German Unity Day, I think it's safe to say that it is definitely going to happen that we're either going to get a vehicle or we're going to get some bundles, I think, or both, actually, thinking about it. Because the bundles last year, as you can see, were very expansive when it came to the actual machines which were on offer. And if there is any bundles, I'll make sure to cover them for you in a video. So on top of this, as well, we have some other events which happened this year which didn't go as well. So the first one pertaining to the Admiralty idea, so the naval idea, was the Sea Voyage event. Now the Sea Voyage went actually great. If you don't know what the Sea Voyage event was, it was the one where you could get the Mariner, the PBM. The event itself kind of came out of nowhere because there hasn't been an event at that time in War Thunder's history during the year. So here's the Mariner, and then of course you got the Leningrad as well, which was the other large prize that was on offer for the Soviets. Here we go, the Leningrad Leader right here, which is a really nice destroyer to have to be able to grind the Soviets out. So you were given those two things, and I believe another vehicle as well, and overall, it was a simple event. It was very similar to Operation Heat, just a bunch of challenges that you do every few days, and you get stuff for it. And then there was another one, which didn't come out of nowhere. It just kind of was a replacement for the World War II Chronicles event, which was an event in history in War Thunder, which meant that you had to play like historical scenarios. You had to complete challenges in those historical scenarios to be able to get stars, which would eventually give you vehicles. Well, they'd swapped it with the Battlefield Engineer event. Now, the Battlefield Engineer event was a mixture of what we saw from the year before in the IS-7 event, so this Build-A-Bear idea where you play games to earn components, whether they be rare or whether they be toolkits, which were like the common currency, I suppose, and then with them, you put them together, build specific vehicles, and you get to keep the vehicles. Now, this event gave you a bunch of different vehicles, 6 overall, and it was great in that aspect. The Build-A-Bear idea was also great. You were able to test the I-180 as well. And this meant that you had an extra layer of interest because you had to kind of work out what was wrong with your vehicle. The problem was the actual mechanic involved when it came to giving out parts. So once you hit your 4th build of the I-180, because the way that the event worked is you had to build a I-180 and then either transfer it into a VFW or the ship, or you had to create 2 of them and build it into a Merkava, a Tiger, or a Ju-388. So it was basically you just had to keep building I-180s and transfer them, to other stuff. Now, the problem was when you hit that 4th I-180, the drops for the special stuff, the special components, just became non-existent. So you ended up with way too many normal parts and no special parts. And once this happened, once people figured this out, then the prices for those parts on the market skyrocketed, because obviously when the supply is low and the demand is high, the price is going to go up. And that's all that happened during this event. So when it came to the event, it was a really nice idea, which was executed pretty well, apart from this one thing, which just was like a stake to the heart, which annihilated the whole event. And it hasn't really been addressed. The fact that, it would have been nice just to see a casual, yeah, we got the numbers wrong at some point, at least in publicly, because if you wanted to get all of these vehicles, there was no way you could have done it without using the market. And the only way you could have done it by using the market is by just throwing money into it, if you really wanted to, or gaming the system, which only works if you have people to game, and if everybody's gaming the system, then nobody is there to game, are they? So, yeah, the Battlefield Engineer event had a lot of positives to it, but it needed refining. And with an event like this, talking about, preparing your production equipment, which normally talks about putting stuff together, maybe some mechanical ideas, then it does hint towards this style of event again, which happened earlier in the year, 11th of April, which was based off the event from last year, the IS-7 event, and of course the T-34E. So this event worked pretty well. The way the IS-7 event worked was very similar to the Battlefield Engineer event, apart from the Battlefield Engineer added in the fact that if you did well in missions, you actually got a little bit of a boost to your overall grinding. You were able to get more toolkits for how you did better in the game. It was a nice little addition, but it was crucified, as I said, by what I explained before. The Operation Summer event did not have this issue. If you just ground out the IS-7 normally, which was more timed-based than skilled-based, then what happened was you got the IS-7 and you got the T-34E, and you got the special components you needed along the way, as long as you were just grinding normally. So, yeah, it was just as simple as that. It was much easier to do. The only issue was time for people, which, when it came to the Battlefield Engineer event, was still an issue. It was still a problem, because as you can see, the event only lasted for 11 days, and also, it was much more exploitative for the market, because, people could just rack up the prices on others. So overall, the Operation Summer event, the IS-7 event, was pretty fun, whereas the Battlefield Engineer event, once, it was figured out, it was kind of broken, was not. But combining the two ideas from this and getting rid of the snag, which we found from the Battlefield Engineer event, there is a great set of foundations that you can use here for an event, which to me would indicate it being up here, right? It would indicate some kind of event that we have here. It is between updates. You know, we've just had update 1.91 release. We will have 1.93 probably in a month or two, you know, depending, because normally you have 5 updates a year in War Thunder, and we have had 3 major ones so far, so we're probably going to get 2 more. So there is a little bit of time between now and the next updates where we could definitely see one of these styles of events, even though we don't really see them at this time period normally in the year. But as shown with the Sea Voyage event, maybe they're ramping up the amount of events that they're doing. On top of this, there is a few other factors to think about. So some of the wording. Admiralty. Admiralty, if you don't know, it's part of the office, well, its official name is the Office of the Admiralty and Marine Affairs. It was part of the UK government since 1707. It was finally dissolved in 1964 and labelled into other stuff such as the Navy Department. So, yeah, the Department of the Admiralty, it doesn't really fit in too well with the theme of the German Unity Day. So, yeah, I just think it's kind of a wording thing. If it isn't a wording thing, though, it could definitely open up some possibilities, not just for the British, but also for the Germans, sticking to the German theme. The other thing as well, with Admiralty, there was a German Admiralty. It was around in the 1800s, though, and it didn't last for very long. It basically went from the 1870s to the 1890s, and nothing really came of it. It just kind of fell apart at the turn of the 20th century. But we do have 2 things in naval which would kind of be interesting to see. The first one being this VS-8 shell again. If you remember, 10 months ago, they actually tested some mine-laying capabilities and the mine mechanics in War Thunder. Now, we haven't heard anything since then for these mine-laying machines, and it was really fun playing them. I had a lot of fun going through the VS-8 and testing it out and trying the mines for myself, and I think it's a mechanic which could fit really well into War Thunder as a machine, you know, which could change the battlefield. The only problem with it was you would have to be able to get on the offensive hard, and once you've won that initial engagement, then start plopping mines everywhere, or you would have to use it in a very defensive fashion. And also, they needed to make it so you could see the mines much further away than you did, because for larger ships, which would get nuked by one mine when the VS-8 was being tested, they needed a little bit more leeway. So for me, it would be lovely to see something like this. The other one, looking at German naval stuff, the U-boat. And this is something that a lot of people have talked about for a while now. The idea of adding in something like a U-boat or just a submarine tech tree in general for most of the nations. And when it comes to the Germans, you do have a decent amount of submarines you can add, all based around World War II. You could go more modern if you wanted, maybe a little bit pre-World War II or even World War I times with their submarines. But for me, you've got a interesting idea that you could maybe test in the game with putting in one specific vehicle and just testing, you know, a mechanic, which would of course be submarines. Now we know that submarines, or at least the mechanics for submarines, are in the game. There is a user mission out there, if you haven't played it, which does that, the G5 submarine one. And what this does is, as long as this loads and doesn't crash anything, what this does is, as you can see, you have the kind of sonar on the side, and then of course you have the actual machine itself. Hey up. What the hell is going on? But you have you have everything over here. You can use, the torpedoes if you want. You can flop around the place. Like, overall, everything works for the machine. And it just shows that the submarine mechanics are there in War Thunder. The other one as well, which kind of lays credence to this idea of adding in a U-boat, which would be a unique vehicle for an event, the good old summer event last year, which came directly after the IS-7 event. What we had was the addition of the FJ4B VMF 232. This machine here. Now, this is a 9.0 jet. It's obviously the FJ4B, and it's a copy of the one which we have in the tech tree. The difference is, though, this has access to bullpups that you can see here. Now, at the time, this was obviously last year. We've had a massive amount of additions to, like, the mechanics of top tier aircraft, recently. But this was the first air-to-guided munitions that we had. This was the first time where we'd seen something that you could control from the air via once it had left your machine. So no longer were rockets and bombs the only thing you had. You had bullpups, and then came along stuff like Nords, then of course the air-to-air stuff like the Sidewinders and also the Firestreaks. So, and now even we're getting into stuff like Fire and Forget, e.g. Stingers on stuff like helicopters. So this was a test of a mechanic that was put into the game because of the good old summer events, which also kind of broke the game in a way, because when you fired a bullpup, it actually followed the missile in instead of keeping your camera at, the cockpits, which was kind of funny. It basically meant that you had the ability to shoot from an airfield and annihilate something which was on the ground in, basically in a completely different airspace. So there is precedent for them bringing in a vehicle which tests a new mechanic as an event vehicle, and I don't think it's a terrible idea to do so, because you get a very decent set of people who are generally quite hardcore when it comes to the game. They play it quite often, and they'll be able to get you a lot of information on how this mechanic works, how to break it, so on and so forth. So for me, it isn't a terrible idea if we got something like that in the form of a U-boat or in the form of the VS-8 or something similar. The other one, which corresponds much more to what we've seen in the past, especially when it comes to the I-7 event, is of course the big one. The Sturmtiger, the rocketed tank destroyer, I suppose you'd call it. It's a Tiger tank with more armor put on the front of it, obviously the turret taken off, superstructure added to it, and a 380mm rocket launcher added to it, mainly designed to annihilate gun emplacements and used on the offensive. Unfortunately, by the time it was ready, and they actually made a few of them, this wasn't just a one and out machine. The thing is, the Germans were on pretty much the defensive. They were losing the Eastern Front. Stalingrad had fallen to the Soviets, and the Soviets were slowly but surely just making their way west. And then, of course, we had the D-Day landings and the rest of the Allies moving east. So, therefore, the Sturmtiger was never really used for what it was supposed to be used for, which was fortification annihilation. Instead, it was used in the Warsaw Uprising as a little bit of a defensive machine, and also it was used in the defense of the Eastern Front to try and stop the Soviets, coming forward. Didn't really work out too well, and instead what we have is just a few of them laying about. So it is definitely a vehicle which a lot of people have talked about, a lot of people would love to see. I personally would like to see it. I don't think it would be useful. The one difference between this and, let's say, something like the IS-7, the vehicle that we see here, there we go. The IS-7 is the IS-7 when it came in was an incredibly good vehicle. It was battering face, it had good armor, a lot of crew survivability just because of the amount of them and where they were spaced, and also it had a very good autoloader with a good gun, and pretty good stabilization on the gun as well. It was a very, very interesting machine to play, and remember, it was at a lower BR as well. So it had a lot going for it. Now the Sturmtiger is a donkey truck. It's a decently armed machine, but with a donkey gun, which may be able to annihilate somebody once in about a minute or two, depending on what reload they give it. Obviously, it's not going to be its historical reload, but we'll have to see what happens with it. So that, to me, would be the choice. If we're going to get a style of event which is similar to the I-7 or the Battlefield Engineer event, and you wanted to mix it in with German Unity Day, it seems like everything comes together and, falls on that. Another idea, which could also happen, which is a little bit far afield because of what they said about the mouse and the Panther II, they could just bring back the mouse, right? So they took the mouse out in update 1.91, and they said that there will be events going forward. You can find the mouse here. And they said that going forward, there will be events where you can use the mouse, you can research the mouse for newer players. Well, what if that was one of these new events? Obviously, they would have to do like the LA174, make it so with the LA174, they put it up for research for a week. If you researched it within that week, you got the LA174. If you didn't research it within that week, you didn't get the LA174. And every so often they bring it back, mainly for Levechkin's birthday. You know, this little pocket rocket here. So they could do the same thing with the mouse, and German Unity Day could be the start of that. On top of this as well, if they didn't make the claims about the paper vehicles, so stuff like the Panther II, you know, the Coelian and stuff, another option which would have been kind of interesting, but obviously I would personally be against, but I know a lot of community members would have liked to see, something like an E50, which is pretty much the idea of a souped-up Panther. So the E50 was part, of course, of the E-series of vehicles. You know, we have one in game, the E100, which will probably be the only E-series we'll get into the game, because it was the one which was closely realized. Where has it actually gone? Oh, it's actually not there anymore. But it was pretty much it was a elongated Panther chassis, which would have had a massive engine in it. It had better frontal armor, and it also had the larger 88 on it, the Pak 43 L71 gun. So it would be pretty much it's more of a Panther 2 than, you know, what the Panther 2 actually is in game, which is of course this machine here. So it was more of a realized design, but it was never built. Like it would be a paper vehicle if they decided to add this, which is why I'm kind of against it, but at the same time, you know, it would be kind of hilarious if they took out these vehicles for being unhistorical and then just added in another unhistorical vehicle. The other three ideas as well is another event that happened on the 3rd of October was the first battle of Mariang Sang, which was a battle between Australian forces and the Chinese. Now, this wasn't a very large battle. It only consisted of around about 1,500 people, and it lasted from the 3rd of October to the 8th, and it was on the border of North Korea, or what we know now of North Korea, and of course South Korea. So this would be part of the Korean War, so we could maybe see some form of Korean War event. Personally, don't think it's a huge pull, but it's definitely something to think about, because unfortunately on the 3rd of October there ain't a lot going on. You got German Unity Day, you got that battle, you got a few other minor battles, and then you've got a few massacres, and I don't think, Gaijin would put an event around a massacre. That sounds like a terrible idea, so we can kind of just, push them to one side. The last two ideas is the idea of Levolution. So, if you don't know what Levolution is, this was a term coined by a Battlefield game, and it was the one where if you felled a tower on one of the missions, it would completely change how the map played. This was also something that Split Second did, which was a racing game on, I believe, the PlayStation 2 or Xbox 360. And what would happen is if you pulled a specific stunt or changed or hit a certain thing, it would change the race map the next time that you went around it. So the idea was you could change it for other drivers, so it would be a little bit faster. Maybe you would try and take the quicker route by knocking something over and, catching it on the next race or the next lap. It was a very interesting idea and a very fun game. Now, with Battlefield, Levolution pretty much means whatever is large in the middle of the map or whatever can be torn down is torn down, and that fundamentally changes how the map feels and how it plays. Now, you could do this in War Thunder on some of the maps, such as Abandoned Factory, but on Cargo Ports, which is the one that we're looking at here, you got these massive cranes. Now, imagine if a massive crane on this cargo port carrying some of the containers actually fell and was able to knock over some areas of the map, so therefore it would completely change parts of how the map worked. It could also crush tanks along its way. It's definitely an interesting idea to think about. And also with the new with the new cargo port map, there isn't a lot of destructible terrain on it. There is obviously fences, there is little things such as barrels and stuff like that, but when it comes to the buildings, none of the buildings are destructible, and none of the containers are destructible, which is very odd. I mean, I always thought it could be done for gameplay reasons, so people can't just, turn the whole mission into just a flying straight thing, whereas you actually have to go around corners and stuff, which could be completely the case, or it could be this ridiculous idea that I've come up with in my head. The last thing I want to talk about is the idea of a monthly war bond blueprint idea, which is something that I've mentioned in the past and I think would fit pretty well in with this idea of prepare your production equipment for the 3rd of October. So if you don't know, every month you have a war bond shop, and they've actually changed it so it shows all on one screen now, or at least for me, which is really nice. But every month you have a war bond shop, and in it you have different boxes, you have different blueprints for vehicles that you can purchase, and you can get yourself premium vehicles for free technically by just playing the game. You can also get special event vehicles for free as well. Overall, it's a nice little thing. It basically means that you as a non-premium player, or you as just a person who plays the game a lot, you yourself can get a lot of stuff for free by just playing War Thunder. It's a great system. Now, one of the things that I've talked about or advocated in the past is you take a system like the IS-7 event or like the Battlefield Engineer event, and you plonk it into either a monthly or bi-monthly or tri-monthly basis and put it into the Warbond shop as a blueprint that you can pick up. So you can buy the blueprint, and what that does is it opens up the workshop menu, which we used to have, which is always available for these specific events. It's normally here, and it tells you what parts you need to grind, gives you specific challenges for special parts, and once you get all those special parts, once you get all those specific challenges, you are able to put together this unique vehicle. This would be on top of the other stuff that we've just had added to the game over this last year, such as the squadron vehicles, which I think is a really lovely system to have. You know, the fact that you're able to grind 2 vehicles at once, and it doesn't have to be in the same tech tree that you're actually grinding. That's really lovely. So you would have, on top of all of these systems, a system which is similar to the Battlefield Engineer event without the Horcrux, which is, of course, the limiter, which was obviously put into the event, and you make it a longer thing instead of just a week or 2 long. And I think that would work incredibly well in this system, and it would mean that, once again, there is another thing to focus on when you're actually just playing the game. By doing these specific challenges, since we don't have, a massively competitive mode in War Thunder, you need to keep people interested with challenges, and you do that with dailies, you do that with decal challenges, you do that with the new medal system they just put in. There's a lot of stuff to keep people interested, but at the same time, why not add another one? Which would mean that people could get some more unique vehicles, and you could also add vehicles which would never really be meta to this idea. So the idea would be so people could get their hands on them, but it's not going to affect their general tech tree progression, which, if they go past a bumper vehicle, they'll kind of be annoyed. Instead, you can just put that bumper vehicle in the Warbond shop, and you could rotate them in and rotate them out, as you wanted to. And a vehicle like the TOG, the TOG 2 could fit pretty well in that idea if you really wanted to do it. But yeah, those are my ideas when it comes to what we're going to see when this drops. Hopefully we get some more information soon, and I'll make sure to cover it for the channel. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, John Ryman, Joseph Anders, Martinez, Mopar 1969, Moxie, Super Cacti, Uyans Terry, and Elove Goats, and of course Seductive Trash Can for supporting the channel.